3 days after the Kenyan government secured a 255 billion shilling loan from the International Monetary Fund, over 150,000 Kenyans have since signed an online petition against the loan. The general assumption is the IMF loan will eliminate poverty should it be distributed equally to all Kenyans. False, as former Director General of Public Debt at the National Treasury of Kenya explains.
Let's say was to give that money to Kenyans. Let's say every Kenyan got on average, let's say about 10,000 shillings. I think it's slightly less. 10,000 shillings and total, go out and spend. In some ways, that would be by very rudimentary economics, wonderful, because then everyone would just go out and spend it on the necessities. A good number of them would save it, but by and large, most of us live right on the edge. So 240 billion shillings would have a massive effect if it was given directly to the public, but it can't, because that money comes with specific and prescribed conditions of how it can be spent, and the government is checked on it. We'll have IMF teams coming to check how that money has been spent. So that might not be a live option.
For a third world country already grappling with a huge public debt, unemployment, corruption, poor health infrastructure, and soaring poverty levels, what exactly can the 255 billion shillings do for Kenya?
To me, one of the most powerful ways of reviving the economy was to take any savings of that sort and put it into a enterprise or business support program. In other words, a place where small businesses can borrow that money at concessional rates. In fact, maybe similar to what we're getting from the IMF. Now, to me, those are sort of conversations, are some of the conversations that we need to hear a lot more. Where the government saves money, put it where it can directly benefit the private sector, so the private sector can employ people again, can get back on its feet, and in a place where then it's basically generating its own wealth.
Even after being ranked among countries set to record significant growth by the IMF a year ago, Kenya's expenditure still exceeds revenue collected. Despite the mismatch, is a loan specifically from the IMF necessary?
The short answer is yes. And part of that, when you consistently are always over budgeting as far as expenditure concerned, then you get in a situation where you have what you call a deficit financing situation, which is what our budgets have been for the last 7-8 years. They basically deficit financing. In other words, our expenditure is always more than the revenue we collect, and that creates a dynamic where every year basically you're borrowing more and more to fill the gap between expenditure and your revenue. Now, the difference is that because of being unable to go to commercial markets, and we would not wish to go to the commercial markets, then in a sense, the World Bank and the IMF, especially the IMF, becomes what you call like your global land of last resort for governments.
The government has assured Kenyans that the loans are concessional with generous terms, including below market interest rates and grace periods. IMF, on the other hand, guarantees that Kenya falls in the traditional low-income country program for soft loans. Nonetheless, taxpayers are concerned with the government's high appetite for foreign aid.
But all up, because some will have matured and others will have been ongoing, it's likely that I don't expect there to be more than 10 that are actually concurrent or still have being paid off. But even then, it's very concessional compared to commercial loans. So that really we didn't have an opportunity or anywhere else we could go to borrow except to the IMF. And remember, they've also set aside a fair bit of funding for especially developing countries that are going through the challenges of COVID-19.
According to the government, its high expenditure and borrowing has transformed the country as far as infrastructure is concerned.
It does raise a lot of questions about what priorities we have, because basically what Kenya has had for the last 20 years, if you go right back to 2002, what happened, that's about 19 years ago, with the coming of the Kibaki administration, there's clearly there's a very strong sense in government that we were fallen behind in our infrastructure assets that would basically be the ones that fuel economic growth. So Kenya has been on a 20-year building spree to catch up on its infrastructure assets.
An economic recovery can only be achieved if the government undertakes structural adjustments to control debt.
One is parastatals. Because they cost us money, very few of them make money. So there's a strong move to rationalize them, cut them back, because whenever they're in deficit, they come back to the national treasury. Another one is, and it's not spoken as much, but it's always in the mix, is payroll. The fact that you have a big public service, there are questions around how do you reduce your payroll, because the government's biggest expenditure is the payroll. I think it's right now at about 60%. In fact, it's slightly more than, in some countries, even up to 80%. You have to cut back on that. The third one is that you have to rationalize your infrastructure projects. In other words, shut down any projects, don't start any new projects, and don't and cut back on any projects that have no economic benefit.
Kenya is set to receive 33.5 billion shillings on the 255 billion shillings loan this week and 79 billion shillings by the end of the 2020-2021 financial